Hey guys, welcome back to DangerPlanet. This is Doug. I'm here with Ian, and today we're going to be talking all about how Ian was victorious in his campaign to take down the 2023 GenCon ShatterPoint event. Hey guys, welcome back to the internet. This is Doug. I'm here with Ian. Ian, say hello to the good folks.
Sup, folks?
And today we are actually celebrating. Congratulations, Mr. Ian. Ian won the Gen Con 2023 ShatterPoint event, which to my knowledge is one of the first and kind of bigger live ShatterPoint events that's ever been held. So congratulations, Mr. Ian. You're the best. The crowd goes wild. Anyway, today we're going to walk through soup to nuts how Ian started prepping for the tournament, the list that Ian brought to the tournament, and then we're going to talk about the 3 rounds that he went through and any of his core takeaways from kind of what he and I see as the formation of the meta of competitive ShatterPoint. So I think probably a good place to start is just the beginning, right? Because quite frankly, Ian, I wouldn't have gone to Gen Con if it wasn't for you. You were the one that convinced me to get my ass in gear and actually join you and Vitaly. So when did you know that you were going to Gen Con? Because for both of us, this was kind of a short notice thing, right?
Oh, like 2 months beforehand. My friends did the same thing to me.
Well, I only knew, like, I think that I wasn't even planning to go, and then I ended up joining you guys like 2 weeks before also. So
yeah, it was pretty quick turnaround.
So let's talk a little bit about when we were going to Gen Con. You knew that you weren't going to play 40k there. You knew that you were basically looking to play board games, hang out, and probably play some ShatterPoint. And I think that was the point that you and I started paying a lot closer attention to what I would consider kind of like the evolving meta of ShatterPoint, because I think we'd reached a point where enough boxes had come out, there was enough flexibility in lists where we could start to make some meaningful list construction decisions, right? And you and I had a lot of beers and a lot of back and forth on what we thought was the most powerful stuff going on in the game right now, what we thought you should run, how we thought you should run it, and I think we ended up with a pretty good list. I mean, the list that we ended up on, you ran all 3 rounds, right?
Yeah, it was using the regular showdown rules, not the premier showdown rules, so there was no list swapping in between rounds. So whatever you entered with was what you used for the 3 rounds of the pod.
Yeah. So I mean, let's not delay any longer. Let's give the folks a little bit of an overview. So I kind of built this list along with you, but I came to you with the components of the list, and then I think we kind of worked on it together, and then you were the one that piloted it for 3 rounds. So your primaries were light side Obi-Wan primary, Vader primary, and then your secondaries were Django, Captain Rex, and then your supporting units were 501st, as well as the Clone Commando Troopers. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah.
Okay. So, I mean, when I came to you with the list, I kind of proposed it to you because I thought that it would do well into what I expected the meta to be, and we'll talk about this a little later, but I was basically like, hey man, you're probably going to see a lot of Grievous, you're probably going to see a lot of like folks running the starter box as Obi-Wan and Anakin. Why don't we make something a little different that I think will play well into that? Before we get into your round by round breakdown, high level thoughts going into the tournament and any core takeaways on this list. What are your thoughts? I mean, you ran it for 3 rounds. Do you think the list is good? Do you think that there's anything? I mean, I can think of one major change that I think we need to make to this list the second that Mace Windu drops, which I think you'll agree with me on. Yep. But what are your core thoughts on kind of the core of this list and after running it for 3 rounds? What are your takeaways?
I mean, I think it's a very strong list. I don't think it's by any means the strongest list in the game, but it's in contention for that.
How did it play on the table for you generally? How did you generally see this list kind of working?
It's a little bit slower than what I'm used to.
Yeah, more defensive.
A little more slower, a little more defensive. I've been up to the tournament. I've been running a lot of Grievous and insert second primary here.
Yeah.
Which obviously is a very powerful archetype. There's a lot of that in the various Gen Con pods.
Almost the majority of it, I would say. I mean, I was watching you play every round, and then I would take little breaks and walk around to the rest of the tables. And I would say a strong 80% of lists were running Grievous.
Yeah, I mean, I know personally in 2 out of the 3 rounds I faced off against Grievous lists, so he was definitely showing out there at the tournament. And a lot of the list really kind of confirmed what I thought about the star of the list, which is Vader, in that Vader is just cracked. He is far and away the single strongest model in the game.
Yeah, I agree.
There was nothing on that table that I couldn't just jam Vader into and be like, this thing dies today.
Yeah. And also giving Vader the extra defensive buff from primary Obi-Wan, I think ends up keeping your Vader alive a lot longer than opposing Vaders, because it's not like you didn't run into other Vaders on the other side of the table, right? But
I actually don't think I did.
I think there was one list that was Grievous Vader, unless I'm wrong. That you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, the round 2 was Grievous Vader. I remember because I had a very silly Vader off that I probably that I could have avoided if I wasn't just going for style points. But yeah, so the extra tankiness of a hunker token that always exists on Vader, more or less, did save his bacon. I'd say probably twice over the course of the tournament. Maybe there might be more times I'm not thinking of.
Yeah, that's significant though. And then so just for the folks that aren't familiar with the exact format, because you already called out one of the important differences of the Gen Con format. What was the core format for this tournament? And then we'll get right into your round 1 and how that went.
So unlike the Legion tournament that was here, it wasn't just a massive 36 table event to try and get more people playing, and to get, I think it was probably the right decision given how new the game is. They split everyone up into pods, so it was a lot of it was, to use a 40k term, it was like a lot of self-contained RTTs.
Yeah.
Where it's each pod was its own instance of an 8-man 3-round tournament.
Yeah, so they're all mini tournaments, and they ran one each day, right? I think.
Yeah, they ran 3 pods a day, and then they ran them on Friday and Saturday.
Oh, so only 2 days. Yeah, I guess I was so busy running around trying to find indie developers, doing interviews and stuff that I was only able to just kind of shadow yours and the one right after it, but I didn't see the one the next day. I didn't realize they did 2 days of it. All right, walk us through. I mean, and just so folks know, the terrain that was set up was basically every single table was set up with a combination of the starting terrain pack, the high ground terrain pack, and the scatter terrain pack. So each table.
No, actually.
No.
I would, from my observation at the tables, it seemed like the terrain packs were almost entirely set up using the starter terrain and the high ground packs. I didn't really see any terrain that was in the take cover pack.
Yeah, but the take cover pack has those water ventilators and some of the scatter terrain that it's just replicated across the starter. So the starter has half the take cover and half the high ground in it, basically.
Yes, so. But I'm saying it was very obvious that they were that double the starter pack plus high ground was being used. I didn't see any situations where it was starter pack plus take cover was being used.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. They utilized the high ground to make elevation distinctions a lot more, which is fair.
Yes.
And here's another good point, because it's a point that I thought was a huge deal about Shatterpoint and something I've really keyed in on when I make my tables to play. Did you see a decent amount of distinction in elevations in terms of ground floor, second floor, and third floor? Was that present on at least every table that you played at?
It was, yeah. The TOs did an excellent job of setting the boards up to make sure that all of the boards had multiple levels of height. I think if I had one complaint about the terrain, it was that not all of the boards were created equal in sense of ingress points, which did end up factoring into my round 3 game. And my opponent and I were talking about, we were comparing some of the other boards. He was saying that he had actually run into that in another round, but he managed to win that round. But it was a situation where some of the boards had an overflowing wealth of ingress points, and some of them had 3.
Yeah, I think that's a good call out too, because I know when you and I play, and when Vitaly plays with us and we play with Brandon, because that's kind of our local meta that we test in at this point, we're very generous with ingress points. In fact, I find myself putting ladders and ingress points almost 2 at a time on each of the big structures. And you're right, when I was walking around to see a lot of these tables, there might have only been 4 or 5 net total on the table, whereas when we play a full 3x3 board, I usually try to put down 10 or 11, 15 different ingress points all over the place. And I would imagine, thinking through it now, talking to you, that probably pretty dramatically affects how the game is played, right? Because it's a lot of free movement when you utilize those things. So, is that what you noticed?
I mean, I can talk about that more when we talk about game 3, because that game had a fairly impactful interaction going around with an ingress point in the middle. But like, yeah, it was definitely a situation where the lighter ingress point boards generally tended to favor one side or the other.
Yeah.
So like,
thank God you had Django the whole tournament.
Yeah.
So you had a good.
Honestly, Django didn't go up high that often. I use Django almost exclusively as a flank holder, or sometimes as a back point holder.
That's funny. He's the man, though. All right, so let's.
Yeah, he's very good.
I think we've done a decent amount of setup here, a decent amount of context. So talk us through. You're on round 1. You set up. Walk us through who you're up against, and give us a couple. That you don't have to go play by play for the entire round, but walk us through what the matchup was, and then walk us through any key high points that you kind of had as takeaways.
So round 1 was against an Obi-Wan Ahsoka list. He was running Oops All Clones, and I would say this was the only game where I felt there was a clear list mismatch.
What do you mean by that?
As strong as Obi-Wan Ahsoka is, they just didn't have like an Oops All Clones list with Obi-Wan Ahsoka as their primaries. Just didn't have the teeth push my list, so it ended up being a situation where and this game was my lowest casualty game of the tournament. I only got 4 casualties in this game, but it was very much a situation of I only did what I needed to do and just kind of won. I recognized fairly quickly that I was losing the first struggle, so I just took board position and gave him the first struggle, and then used my positioning to kind of just bully him out of the mid board for the next 2 struggles.
Yeah, so you said
Vader just walked into his army and he could do almost nothing about it. He just flat killed the 212th. Ahsoka ran over, bodied Vader, and then Vader almost killed her and with the Sith Lord Strikes Back ability. Like,
yeah, and I think you make an incredibly good point here, which is pretty salient. So I just want to take a second to call it out. One of the things that we've run into in our testing for like Comp REL ShatterPoint games is knowing when you're in a bad position in Struggle 1 and playing to set yourself up to win Struggles 2 and 3, which is what Ian, I think, just referred to here. He basically looked at the board, looked at how tanky his opponents were and their position on it, and I'm betting, Ian, what you said to yourself is, well, because of how this looks, I'm probably trending towards not winning Struggle 1, so I'm going to be a little bit more conservative and play to win Struggle 2 and 3 with my guys exactly where I want them for those points. Is that what you were referring to?
Not even probably not. I mathed it out in my head, and I pretty quickly figured out that it was borderline impossible for me to win Struggle 1 outside of dice luck going against him.
Yeah, but that's where you were at. That's like what you're referring to, right? In a broader scheme.
Yeah. I looked at the board state. I looked at the activations that I had already cycled through. I looked at what he had left on the board, and I just kind of realized, short of him just absolutely flubbing multiple activations in a row, there isn't a way that I win Struggle 1.
Yeah, and then so you were able to grind it out on 2 and 3, and ultimately you won that round, right? I'm pretty sure.
Yep. Yeah,
Cool.
pretty decisively, because once I set up for I obviously got priority on picking the second point, which gave me Struggle 2, and then by the time Struggle 3 came around, half his army was lying in the dirt, and I really only had Vader that was dinged up, so I was able to just use my commandos, use the 501st, use Rex, Obi-Wan, and Vader when he stood back up, to just kind of shove him fully out of the center.
Yeah, that makes sense.
At one point, I got a triple push on a Barasafi that just threw her halfway across the board, and she was just not relevant ever again from that point. Like,
and so the list he was running probably Clone Commander Cody, Barasofi, 212th, and Clone Commandos. That was the rest of his list.
Yeah, if I recall, it was Obi, Ahsoka, Barris, Cody, and then 212th and Commandos.
Yeah, so he's running the 2 boxes basically. He was running the Hello There and the.
Well, aside from Luminara.
Right. Fair enough. And so I guess any core takeaways, anything that surprised you about round 1?
Just that the 212th are falling more and more in my estimations.
Yeah, I think the clone command. I think the clones we're want to be using moving forward are the ARP troopers and the
ARF.
Yeah, the ARF troopers and the clone commandos. I really am a big fan of both those guys, to be honest. All right, well, now I think this round 2 is when you ran into the great meta menace the first time you see him, right?
Yep.
Is Mr. Grievous. So talk us through kind of what's going on with round 2.
So round 2, obviously, went up against Vader Grievous. The rest of his list was Oops All Droids.
Well, but what was the? Do you remember the rest of his list, or Kraken, or did he take Kalani?
No, he had he had Kraken. He had B2s.
And then I think he took Magna Guard. I'm pretty sure I remember him having Magna Guard on the table against you.
Yeah, I believe he also had Django and Magna Guard, if I remember that list correctly.
I think so as well, because that's what I remember from round 2. I distinctly remember seeing Django and Magna Guard on the table, and I was like, okay, he's taking Magna Guard instead of B1s, basically.
Yeah, and in this one, I decided to get to silly and just kind of go for the memes instead of playing as absolutely hard as I could. He pushed his Vader very aggressively off the bat and took a lot of damage doing it, and I could have just shot him to death, but I decided to jam my Vader into his Vader and have Vader off because there can only be one.
And then you rolled dice at each other, basically, except your Vader had defensive tokens and his didn't, basically.
Yeah, we ended up just KOing each other, which is pretty funny. Or more or less KOing each other. My Vader lived on like 2 tokens and got shot to death by Django in the next activation. But
how did
essentially KOing each other? But like it honestly, like in review of that game, it honestly wasn't the worst decision in the world, because it then had my Vader in a strong position near the middle of the board. I put his Vader down on the ground, and my Vader was more survivable than his was, so that wound on his Vader mattered more. And then on top of that, I think I had the more mobile and I guess more well-suited list to taking the fluctuating primary in scenarios 2 and 3 on.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
and commandos with ascension cables helped there a good amount.
Yeah, it worked out. It worked out pretty well for me.
How did Grievous?
How did he use his Grievous real bad?
Okay, there we go. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. And the reason I wanted to ask you this is because from just talking to people and from taking in conversation around this game, a lot of people, I think, feel that if you bring Grievous, you'll just win if your opponent doesn't bring Grievous. And I was pretty keen to disprove that as like a train of thought. And you actually did it, because you never actually played Grievous, but you ran into a crap load of Grievous. I think my take on it, and I'll ask you obviously what you think, is my take on it is that while Grievous is incredibly powerful and he can output a ton of damage on only like 3 progressions on his damage track, he still is actually just defense 4 on both shoot and melee in the mode that he's usually in, and you can clap back at him pretty hard. And when I've played him recently, I've tried to do more like baiting him, getting him to come away from like a primary bubble, and then just smashing him in the face. But I'm curious kind of how you ran into him, because this tournament had a lot of Grievous players and a lot of different types of Grievous soup lists. So what do you think there?
So like he was running Grievous the way I think you need to run Grievous, which is with Magna Guard. When you have Magna Guard with Grievous, you can manipulate how your opponent engages with him, so that you can deny your opponent like optimal engagements with Grievous. Unfortunately, he just kind of threw Grievous into the wind. Turn 1, he ended up getting Grievous on height 3 terrain. And he just struggle 1, excuse me, and he just kind of left Grievous up there the entire time, which I thought was really smart. Center of the board, height 3 terrain, just kind of like just waiting to pounce on someone. And then he ended up just windmill slamming Grievous into Jango Fett and rolling. He ended up rolling 8 misses into Jango Fett, and I blocked the other 3.
Wild.
So he dove on Django, did absolutely 0 damage, and then just died to the clapback from Obi-Wan, Django, 5-0 first. Like, he was just surrounded at that point. And Grievous can take a punch. He's an 11 health primary, but when you just throw Grievous out there to the wolves like that,
he's also a 4 defense primary.
Yeah. When you throw Grievous out there to the wolves like that, he just kind of melts.
Yeah.
he ended up having to try and retreat with his Grievous. His Grievous did literally nothing all game, and got 2 injuries because as he was retreating, I just kind of like blasted him more with Django and the 501st and just took him down.
Yeah.
So like his Grievous was functionally out of the game from the moment he misplayed him, which I think is a really big weakness of Grievous, is that while he is a wildly powerful primary who can solo almost anyone in the game, if you misplay Grievous, he just dies.
He's a glass cannon. He's the
100%. I equate him to like a Drazar from 40k.
Yeah, he's a glass cannon, high mobility, high damage, and oopsies, not too much defense. So, and then this was the spicy game. Is this the game where you just like ended up going ham sandwich on this guy and causing a significant amount of casualties?
Yeah, I had 8 casualties in this game. The TO said that he had never.
To be clear, you caused 8 casualties, not you.
Yes, I only took 4. Yeah. I caused 8 casualties in this game. The TO said he had never seen so many casualties in a game of Shatterpoint. Unfortunately, I did end up losing this game because the RNG on the only scenario we have.
Yeah, 33% says
it's impossible for me to win. The primary objective never left his side of the field.
Yeah, that's rough. That's one thing that's the one element of this entire game that I'm looking forward to getting an update on, which is simply just getting 1 or 2 new scenarios for us to add into the pool. I'm not a huge fan of having a 33% chance of one of the primary objectives be worth double randomly on turns, sequences 2 and 3 instead. I'm excited to have that change a little bit.
Honestly, the primary being where it was the reason I had so many casualties. I was trying to push really hard to get to that primary.
And he's trying to stop you, basically.
Yeah, and he was just throwing bodies at me, just slow me down. But like it ended up just coming down to a if I had got primary luck once, I would have won this one. I had firm board control over 2/3 of the objectives that mattered.
Yep.
So it's unfortunate, but them's the breaks sometimes. You live and you learn. So I was 1-1 going into round 3.
Yeah, you were 1-1, but you had I guess what ended up happening in your favor was you had really good breakers as a result of this, or whatever they were using as breakers, right? Was it casualties they were using as breakers? Net.
So casualties were the 3rd tiebreaker. The 1st tiebreaker was obviously wins. 2nd tiebreaker was total struggles 1, and then 3rd tiebreaker was casualties.
Got it. So you had a high net number of total struggles 1 and a large amount of casualties, which at the end of the day, as we'll discuss, kind of won it for you, basically.
Correct. Yeah, I ended up having the 2nd and 3rd tiebreakers.
Yeah, the best of both of those. All right, cool. So you're in round 3 now. What is the list that you ran up against in round 3?
This is another Grievous list, and this one was just oops all droids. He was running Kraken and Kalani. He was running B1s and B2s.
And then wasn't his other primary Asajj, I think?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was running Grievous, Asajj, B1.
He was just running
he
was just running the Grievous and Asajj boxes.
Yeah, which I actually think is a fine list. Honestly, I really like Asajj model.
So
I think she's a good high skill expression model and a very good finesse model. I don't think she carries the brute force or the brute survivability with her that some of these other primaries do. But I think if you're looking to play, Trixie, and you're okay with having a little bit of a less survivable primary unit, I think Asajj is definitely a viable primary to play. I don't think she's the most powerful, but I think she's probably one of the most fun, in my opinion, to play with.
So she's viable, but I wouldn't take her to a tournament expecting to win.
Yeah, that's probably
because Asajj has a fairly major weakness in that she can't fight her way out of a paper bag. She wounded exactly nothing over the course of the game. She never because I'm aware of how fast Asajj can move and what she can do. I was able to position against her to really prevent her from being able to utilize her movement to the fullest. So she never really got into a spot where she was able to punish me with being able to double jump and sprint all over the board. And because my list had so much kill power in it, as well as being fairly mobile, my opponent had to really respect that fact and not use Asajj to try and go hunt weaker things like the 501st or the Public Commandos, because if he did,
they end up
Asajj would have just got fucking blanked.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I don't think she's the most powerful out there, but I certainly think she's a fun piece. So walk us through kind of the highlights of round 3 for you, or any meaningful interactions.
So highlights of round 3. This one went to time. Our opponent, he said, was a newer war gamer. So we were playing a little bit slower. So I ended up winning this one 2 struggles to none. He was actually the 2-0 going into this, the only 2-0 going into this round.
So you got paired
beating
up,
him,
actually.
Yes, I paired up into him in this round, and beating him is what got me the win. And this round was also the round that I was talking about, where we were talking about the ingress points. We had a fairly major interaction with ingress points in this map, where we had a center ingress point. I had almost all the ingress points on my side of the map. There was one ingress point in the center of the map, and due to how it was placed, it was one of the ones with one of the skinny ledges with the solid terrain in the middle.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to get Cody up, I was able to get Rex up at the top of the ladder, and Rex just kind of stood there and body blocked the ingress point, so he couldn't really get anything up the ingress point to get onto the higher terrain. So I just kind of owned the higher level terrain from that point on. Because I had multiple ways to get up there. That was basically his only way. Because I got a model there first, I just stood there and just said, "You aren't coming up top."
He could have force jumped or scaled up there with one of the independent primaries, but then they're standing out there, and then you just go after it. Basically, I would assume. So he didn't want to overextend into that with his.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I was talking about, where it's like, Asajj couldn't just go body Rex because I had Vader standing right there.
Right next to him. Yeah. That makes sense. Cool. Well, I mean, I'm a little bit jealous that I didn't play in this. I should have brought. I was afraid to bring my models down. I thought they were going to break in the car. I was super paranoid about it. It was a really good event. Yeah, I brought my ShatterPoint table, but I should have brought my models. It would have been really fun to play in it. So let's talk a little bit about the meta. Let's talk a little bit about, for the first time, what I think is ShatterPoint moving into a position where there's finally enough distinct units available and teams that can be made that is actually pretty interesting. And we're no longer forced to choose between like 4 equivalents of squad boxes. What are your thoughts on the meta right now? What do you think some of the most popular lists are? What do you think the more powerful stuff you can be running is? And I guess my last question is, what are you looking forward to? I mean, Mother Talzin, as of date of recording, Mother Talzin and Mace Windu have obviously been revealed, but they haven't been dropped. Do you think anything like that, or do you think the upcoming like Luke Skywalker Tatooine boxes, anything like that you're looking forward to? I know I just asked you 3 questions at the same time, so feel free to answer those in whatever order you want.
So as far as stuff I'm looking forward to, obviously everything. All the boxes that have been revealed look very. I mean, aside from the handmaidens, I don't really care about them, but. The Mother Talzin box looks amazing. The Windu box I care about as far as the ARF troopers. I'm not sure how much I care about Pons or Windu, which is too bad because Windu's one of my favorite characters, but I don't really see myself using much of Windu.
ARF troopers going to be legit, dude. ARF troopers.
Yeah, ARF troopers are going to open up a lot of archetypes just because of how cheap they are and their coordinated fire exposed.
Yeah,
there was. I was telling you, it's like there were. In round 2, there were a couple times where if I had coordinated fire exposed instead of coordinated fire strained, I would have won the round.
Right, because one of the biggest uses for coordinated fire exposed is if you're going to go in and choose extreme violence with a primary against another primary, and if they have exposed on them, that takes away a lot of their survivability. And I'll give you 2 different use cases. One of the use cases is the Grand Inquisitor. A lot of that model's durability is tied into his incredibly impressive defensive specialty track. And another one is Luminara Unduli. A lot of her defensive track is incredibly powerful. Heck, I mean, most primaries have a pretty decent defensive track. And just stripping that away from them, and then going in with like a buffed Vader attack, for example, really fundamentally changes the survivability of the math of a primary. You're moving from a scenario where you might be going into them non-exposed and you're thinking, oh, like 75% of the time I can probably get this wound off this model. The math flips on its head in your favor when you drop an exposure track on something like a primary. I mean, obviously it's a little less exaggerated when you expose like a secondary or support because they're not going to have traditionally as crazy defensive specialties, But do you feel that that's like a fair statement to make?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like taking away expertise against enemy models removes the ability to it's the only way to turn crits into misses. So like it removes the ability to block crits. It removes abilities like Asajj's where she can jump away.
Yeah.
It severely hampers really just about anyone. I think like some of the only models that don't care are probably like Grievous, but that's just because he sucks defensively anyway. So like whatever, you're taking away a block or two from him.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page on that. What's your take on what you think some of the most popular lists floating out there are now? Do you think it's changed since? I mean, obviously it had to have changed since the launch of the game, because the launch of the game only saw 4 boxes. Now we've got more than double that. But what do you think are some of the more popular lists hanging out there now?
I mean, at the moment, I would assume that just based on what I saw at the event, that it's a lot of oops all droids or variations of. Separatist Alliance lists were very popular, and usually and lists taking 1 or 2 of the super tactical droid secondaries were also very common. And I still think that is a very powerful archetype. Obviously, the internal synergy between that list is incredible. I have solidified my stance on it, and that I don't think it's necessary to take Kalani and Kraken. I think you're actually hampering yourself if you do that. It's not a bad list per se, but it's definitely better to take a mobile secondary in place of Kalani, who's fairly expensive himself. Take a mobile secondary like Jango Fett, or when he comes out, Savage Opress.
You can also take Padawan Ahsoka. She's got also the same jump, and she's got deflect. She's good as like a little jumpy, annoying melee unit. The promo model.
I mean, I don't see a lot of scenarios where I would take a Padawan Ahsoka over Savage, but yeah.
Yeah, that's probably true. Once Savage Opress comes out, that model's going to be heck of a model. That's going to be a secondary model that kills primaries, is what that is.
Yeah, he's kind of nuts, man. He's kind of nuts. But yeah, like obviously that seems like it's a fairly popular archetype. Outside of that, I would say there wasn't a lot of like list metas that were popping up. So more as much like meta primaries. It was the exception, not the rule, to see a list that didn't have that didn't have Vader. Like almost everyone had Vader, most everyone had Grievous, and a lot of people had one or the other, or had both of them. So like people running neither of them, and like obviously no shade of them, play the game how you want to play. It's you have to have fun with your list, but like, people running neither of them were kind of setting themselves up for a disappointing outing, I think, because I think it's very hard to compete without at least one of the two of them.
Now,
that being said, General Obi-Wan is still very powerful.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So let's take what you said, which I think is a reasonable statement, and let's break it down for a second. Do you think that there is a way, given that we now kind of have front runners in terms of what I think the community agrees is some of the more powerful units, is there a way that you as a competitive player can go counter to that meta stream and kind of make counter picks? I kind of tried when I built this list for you and brought it to you and explained it to you. I kind of tried to set you up so that you could counter what I thought was coming, which was a stream of Grievouses and Vaders. But do you think that there's an even better way to do that, given now having lived through it? Like,
not currently.
Okay. And
the one of the only lists that I thought might I haven't had a chance to play into it much, but one of the only lists that I thought might have some legs into a Vader or Grievous list is the Obi-Wan Ahsoka list, because obviously Ahsoka has the ability to reflect damage back onto her attacker. She gets to take a full move towards a character who just wounded somebody, and you're going to be wounding a lot of people with Vader and Grievous. So she felt like she was gonna be a good tech piece to counter them, and in actual like in-game usage, it just didn't work out that way. Like Ahsoka for all of her power, in that scenario, just like she's not enough to carry that list, and
the absence of the other primaries, the power vacuum the difference is still too big, you think, for now?
Yeah, well, because like one thing that I found fairly off, because like Obi-Wan's big issue is that Obi-Wan has a limited damage track, and that doesn't matter as much when you're combining in with somebody that can spike, 13 damage on someone. But when it's Obi-Wan and Ahsoka, and neither of them even have a chance of one turning a Vader or a Grievous, because they can't hit the correct damage thresholds, like it really ends up doing those lists in, because to properly counter those lists, you need to be able to just turn off one of those primaries.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I do think, as we see, I mean, how many boxes do we have pending as of time of recording? Mace Windu technically hasn't dropped. We haven't seen him on the table yet. We haven't seen Mother Talzin lists on the table because that box hasn't been dropped. I was hoping to get my hands on it at Gen Con. And then we also have the Tatooine Luke box coming up that we know about. And then we also know about everybody's favorite Blue Cowboy Jedi Assassin with his box coming out. So
yeah, I'm really interested in those two boxes.
Yeah, I am too. I mean, I think a lot of people are.
I will also say, I think Mother Talzin is going to be the next box that I'm curious about for trying to counter the brick house meta that we're currently in, where you're just facing off against these gigantic beat sticks, because especially Vader, not so much Grievous, but Grievous is a little bit easier to deal with than Vader, but especially Vader's biggest issue is mobility.
Right, and she counters that directly.
And Mother Talzin can just be like, what if you were over there? Have fun moving back to me next turn.
Yeah, exactly. It's the whole thing where, like, oh my god, how do you beat this model? And sometimes the answer in strategy and war games is you don't actually fight the model, you just grossly misposition it. That's why Pope DARPA thinks that toss is the most powerful action in Malifaux, because getting a free range 10-inch line push of a model can sometimes be better than killing the model. Can also just remove it from the game. And I think
100%.
That's kind of what you're getting at here with Vader, which is, while very, very, very powerful, his weakness is mobility. And if you can attack him exactly on that angle, and you can displace him of 2 turns worth of movement away, or 2 activations of movement away, all of a sudden that's 2 less activations that this Vader is going to get, lighting up his lightsaber and firing into your face with aggression, right?
Yeah, I mean, that is sort of the idea there, is that manipulating hand can be, especially because you resolve the move, not your opponent, it can place Vader in a spot where Vader really doesn't want to be. Like, say he's on a catwalk. You can make Vader walk off the catwalk on the wrong side where there is no ingress point to get back on it, and now Vader is just out of the game.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's going to be really interesting to see. I think the ShatterPoint so far for me has been one of my most pleasant surprises of 2023. I picked up this game initially just because some of my friends were getting into it, and right now I own every ShatterPoint model. It's all painted, and I'm eagerly anticipating buying additional plastic from AMG. So I think they've done something right with it. My only takeaway that, like, on my wish list right now is I really am looking forward to getting a second and a third scenario, so that we don't just have this one competitive scenario on loop right now. I think personally for me, the most frustrating element of that scenario is in the second and third struggles, where literally randomly there's a 33% chance of one of these objectives being worth double, and neither player has agency over it, which kind of ruffles my jimmies a little bit, but not to the point where it makes me not enjoy the game. That's like my one nitpick I would say on this.
Sure.
What are your kind of thoughts on the current state of the game right now?
No, yeah, about the same. I think it's in a really good spot for being a brand new game. It's a pretty tight set of rules, not a lot of unsolvable question marks in them. Despite Vader being overwhelmingly powerful, I don't think the models that have been released so far have, been unbalanced too hard in one direction or the other. If with the volume models and the speed at which they release them that have come out, the fact that only one seems to be like, maybe he's a little bit too strong, it seems like it's a pretty good statement on the health of the game.
Yeah, I think that's fair. All right, I mean, anything else other than saying goodbye to the internet?
No. Obviously, we're gonna probably be doing some more of these soon, as locally tournaments are gonna start sprouting up now that we've got the most of the core Wave 1 releases are out. So just looking forward to messing around with some more competitive ShatterPoint and seeing where the meta takes us. Really hoping that Luke box is gonna be good, because boy do I love the models in that box.
I cannot imagine Luke Skywalker will be a bad model.
I don't care about Luke. I want R2 I so badly want Sail Barge R2 to be just be like stupid. That'd be
I hope he is
amazing.
too. I hope he is too, man. I hope he is too. All right. Say goodbye to the internet, Ian. Until next time.
Adios.
All right. Goodbye, guys. We'll see you next time.